I'm 29 years old, and I just realized that my entire childhood was built on a lie. My name is Sarah, and I thought I knew what unconditional love looked like until the day my mother refused to co-sign my student loan. Then 3 weeks later, surprised my younger sister with a brand new BMW for her 21st birthday. That moment shattered everything I believed about our family, but what I discovered next about the real reason behind her decision changed my life forever. Growing up as the eldest daughter in what appeared to be a close-knit middle-class family, I always believed my parents loved my sister Emma and me equally. My father worked as an electrical engineer, my mother as a high school counselor, and we lived in a comfortable suburban home with a 2-car garage and a backyard perfect for barbecues. On the surface, we looked like the American dream family, complete with annual vacations to Disney World and perfectly coordinated Christmas card photos. But looking back now with the clarity that only comes from distance and therapy, I can see the subtle patterns that were always there. Emma, 3 years younger than me, had this effortless way of capturing attention. She was naturally charismatic, the kind of child who could charm adults without trying. Teachers loved her, neighbors adored her, and extended family always commented on how special she was. I, on the other hand, was the responsible one, the one who helped with dinner, remembered everyone's birthdays, and never caused any trouble. When Emma struggled with math in middle school, my parents immediately hired a tutor and spent $200 a month ensuring she had extra support. When I struggled with the same subject 2 years earlier, my mother simply told me I needed to work harder and suggested I ask my teacher for help during lunch breaks. When Emma wanted to quit piano lessons after 6 months because she found them boring, my parents let her switch to art classes instead. When I asked to quit piano after 3 years of dedication because I wanted to focus on debate team, my mother insisted I honor my commitment and continue lessons for another full year. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Emma's needs were accommodated, while mine were character-building opportunities. Emma's failures were met with support and resources, while mine were met with expectations of self-reliance and personal responsibility. I learned early that being the good daughter meant being the self-sufficient daughter, and I wore that identity like armor, never questioning whether it was fair. Throughout high school, I maintained a 4.2 GPA while working part-time at a local bookstore to save money for college. I participated in debate team, volunteered at the animal shelter, and tutored younger students in English. I was everything a parent should be proud of, and I genuinely believed my parents were proud of me. They attended my debate competitions, celebrated my academic achievements, and frequently told friends and family about my accomplishments. Emma, meanwhile, maintained average grades and focused primarily on her social life. She was popular, dated frequently, and seemed to glide through high school without the intense pressure I put on myself. My parents never seemed worried about her future the way they constantly discussed mine. While they regularly asked me about my college plans, scholarship applications, and career goals, conversations about Emma's future were always more relaxed, more optimistic, as if her success was inevitable rather than something that required planning and effort. When it came time for college applications, I had my heart set on Northwestern University's journalism program. It was expensive, even with the partial academic scholarship I had earned, but I had calculated that with student loans and my continued part-time work, I could make it financially feasible. The only obstacle was that as an 18-year-old with limited credit history, I needed a co-signer for the larger loan that would cover my remaining tuition and living expenses. I approached this conversation with my parents carefully, presenting them with detailed spreadsheets showing my projected earnings after graduation, repayment plans, and even alternative scenarios if I couldn't find employment immediately. I had researched average starting salaries for journalism majors, created a realistic budget for my college years, and demonstrated that I had already secured admission to a prestigious program that would set me up for career success. My mother listened to my entire presentation, reviewed my paperwork, and then shook her head with what seemed like genuine regret. She explained that co-signing a loan was a significant financial responsibility, and that she and my father had discussed it extensively. They were concerned about taking on debt that could impact their own financial security, especially with Emma's college years approaching. She emphasized that this wasn't personal, but rather a practical decision based on their overall financial picture. I was disappointed but not devastated. I understood their concerns and immediately began researching alternatives. I applied for additional scholarships, looked into work-study programs, and even considered attending the local state university instead, where costs would be significantly lower. My parents seemed relieved that I was handling their decision so maturely, and my mother frequently commented on how responsible and independent I was. 3 weeks later, I came home from my bookstore job to find a gleaming white BMW sedan parked in our driveway with a giant red bow on the hood. Emma was standing next to it, practically bouncing with excitement, while my parents beamed with pride. The car, my mother explained, was an early 21st birthday gift for Emma, a reward for finally bringing her grades up to a B average during her senior year. The BMW was beautiful, a brand new 3 Series that I later learned cost $42,000. Emma had never had a job, had never expressed any particular need for a car beyond normal teenage desires for independence, and had never demonstrated the kind of academic or personal achievement that would typically warrant such an extravagant gift. But there it was, purchased outright. No financing required according to my father's proud explanation. I stood in our driveway, watching my sister run her hands over the leather interior of her new car, while my parents took photos and talked about how excited they were to give her this surprise. Something cold and sharp settled in my stomach as I processed what I was seeing. This car cost more than my entire student loan would have been. This gift, given freely and joyfully, represented the exact amount of financial commitment my parents had deemed too risky when it came to my education. That night I lay in bed trying to make sense of what felt like a fundamental betrayal. How could the same parents who couldn't co-sign a loan for their daughter's education afford to purchase a luxury vehicle for their other daughter's birthday? How could they justify the financial responsibility argument when they had just made a purchase that was pure indulgence rather than investment in someone's future? I began to pay attention to things I had previously overlooked. Emma's designer clothes that appeared regularly in her closet without any mention of where they came from. The expensive electronics that materialized for her birthdays and holidays. The spring break trip to Cancun with her friends that my parents funded entirely, while I had worked extra hours to afford a modest trip to visit colleges during my junior year. The financial disparities were obvious once I started looking for them, but what hurt more was the difference in expectations and support. Emma was encouraged to enjoy her youth, to explore her interests, to take time figuring out what she wanted to do with her life. I was expected to have a plan, to be responsible, to solve my own problems and finance my own dreams. When I tried to discuss my observations with my mother, she deflected with familiar refrains about my independence and strength. She told me that she and my father had always known I would be successful no matter what, that I had the drive and capability to achieve anything I set my mind to. Emma, she explained, needed more support and encouragement because she wasn't as naturally self-motivated as I was. This explanation felt like gaslighting disguised as a compliment. Being capable and driven shouldn't disqualify someone from receiving the same level of support and investment as their siblings. My achievements shouldn't be used as justification for providing me with fewer opportunities and resources. But every time I tried to express these feelings, I was told I was being jealous or ungrateful, that I should be proud of my independence rather than resentful of Emma's advantages. I ended up attending the state university, taking on smaller loans I could manage independently, and working 25 hours a week throughout college to cover my expenses. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in journalism and landed a competitive internship at a major newspaper immediately after graduation. My parents were proud, of course, but their pride felt hollow compared to the excitement they had shown for Emma's mediocre achievements. Emma, meanwhile, started college at a private liberal arts school with all expenses paid by our parents. She changed her major 3 times, took 6 years to graduate, and moved back home afterward with no clear career direction. My parents were supportive and patient, assuring her that she had plenty of time to figure things out and that they were happy to help her however she needed. The real revelation came 2 years after my college graduation, when I was visiting home for Thanksgiving. Emma was upstairs napping off a hangover from the night before, and my parents were in the kitchen preparing dinner. I overheard a phone conversation my mother was having with my aunt, Emma's godmother, who lived across the country. My mother was explaining that Emma was struggling to find direction and that she and my father were considering funding a master's degree program for her, even though Emma hadn't expressed any particular interest in graduate school. Then my aunt apparently asked about me because my mother's tone shifted noticeably. She lowered her voice and moved closer to the window, away from where I was sitting in the living room. What I heard next shattered everything I thought I knew about our family dynamics. My mother explained to my aunt that she had always felt differently about Emma because Emma had been an unplanned pregnancy that brought her and my father closer together during a difficult period in their marriage. She described Emma as their miracle baby, the child who saved their relationship and reminded them why they wanted to be together. Then she talked about me, and her words were like ice water in my veins. She told my aunt that I had been planned, that I was conceived during a time when she wasn't sure she wanted to stay married to my father, and that my arrival had coincided with the most stressful period of their relationship. She said that while she loved me, she had never felt the same spontaneous joy and protectiveness toward me that she felt for Emma. My mother explained that she had always known I would be fine on my own because I was strong and capable, but that Emma needed extra care and attention because she was more vulnerable and sensitive. She justified the unequal treatment by saying that different children needed different types of support, and that treating us exactly the same would actually be unfair because we had different personalities and capabilities. The conversation continued with my mother detailing how much money they had spent on Emma over the years, describing it as necessary investment in her future happiness and success. She mentioned the BMW, the college expenses, the spending money, and various other financial support as examples of how much they were willing to sacrifice for Emma's well-being. When my aunt apparently asked about similar support for me, my mother's response was that I had never needed that kind of help because I was naturally more independent and resourceful. I sat in that living room, listening to my mother casually explain to her sister why one daughter deserved unconditional financial and emotional support, while the other daughter deserved to struggle and overcome obstacles independently. The painful irony was that my independence and strength weren't innate personality traits. They were survival mechanisms I had developed in response to being raised with different expectations and standards than my sister. The most devastating part of the conversation was when my mother described the student loan situation. She told my aunt that she and my father had actually been able to afford co-signing my loan, but that they had decided it would be better for my character development if I found another way. She said they knew I would figure it out because I always did, and that the experience of overcoming that obstacle would make me stronger and more self-reliant. Meanwhile, they had been planning Emma's BMW purchase for months, saving money specifically for that surprise because they wanted to show her how much she meant to them. The car wasn't a reward for any particular achievement, it was simply an expression of love and an investment in her happiness. I realized in that moment that I had spent my entire life earning love that was being given to my sister freely. I had achieved academically, worked constantly, behaved responsibly, and pursued ambitious goals not because these things came naturally to me, but because I unconsciously understood that my worth in our family was conditional on my accomplishments and self-sufficiency. Emma, on the other hand, had learned that she was valued simply for existing, that her needs and wants would be met regardless of her effort or achievement. She had never developed the same drive or resilience that I had because she had never needed to. She was loved unconditionally, while I was loved conditionally, and the difference had shaped both of our entire personalities and life trajectories. That night, I made a decision that would change the course of my relationship with my family forever. I couldn't pretend I hadn't heard what I had heard, and I couldn't continue participating in a family dynamic that was based on such fundamental inequality and deception. The next morning, I asked my parents to sit down with me for a serious conversation. I told them directly that I had overheard my mother's phone call with my aunt, and that I finally understood the real reason behind years of different treatment. I didn't yell or accuse. I simply stated the facts as I now understood them and asked them to explain their perspective. My mother's face went completely white when she realized what I had heard. My father looked confused at first, then defensive as I outlined specific examples of the different standards and support systems that had been applied to Emma and me throughout our lives. They both tried to minimize what I was saying, to reframe their choices as appropriate responses to our different personalities rather than favoritism based on the circumstances of our births. But I was 24 years old. I had been working as a journalist for 2 years, and I had learned how to recognize deflection and manipulation. I presented them with the same kind of detailed analysis I would use for an investigative article, complete with financial calculations and timeline documentation. I showed them exactly how much money they had spent on Emma compared to me, how many opportunities they had created for her compared to the obstacles they had allowed me to face alone. The conversation lasted for over 3 hours, and by the end, both of my parents were crying. My father admitted that they had made mistakes, and that some of their decisions had been unfair. My mother struggled more with accountability, continuing to insist that they had done what they thought was best for both of us based on our different needs and personalities. I told them that I needed time and space to process what I had learned, and that I would be limiting my contact with them while I figured out how to move forward. I explained that I wasn't cutting them off permanently, but that I couldn't continue pretending our family dynamic was healthy or normal when I now understood it was based on fundamentally unequal treatment rooted in circumstances beyond my control. Emma was furious when she learned about the conversation. She accused me of being dramatic and ungrateful, of trying to cause problems in our family over something that had happened decades ago. She couldn't understand why I was upset about receiving different treatment when that treatment had made me stronger and more successful than she was. Her reaction actually validated everything I had realized about our family dynamic. Emma had never learned to consider other people's perspectives or feelings because she had never needed to. She had been protected from consequences and difficult emotions her entire life, so she genuinely couldn't comprehend why I would be hurt by systematic exclusion and conditional love. I spent the next 6 months in therapy, working with a counselor who specialized in family trauma and helping me understand the psychological impact of growing up as the unfavored child in a family system based on preferential treatment. I learned about scapegoat and golden child dynamics, about how birth circumstances and parental psychology can create lasting patterns of unequal treatment, and about how children adapt to these systems by developing survival strategies that often persist into adulthood. My therapist helped me recognize that my perfectionism, my need to prove my worth through achievement, and my difficulty asking for help were all adaptations I had developed to cope with conditional love and support. She also helped me understand that my parents' treatment of me wasn't actually about my capabilities or independence. It was about their own psychological limitations and the story they had told themselves about our family. During this period, I also experienced something I had never expected: professional vindication that validated everything I had been trying to prove to my family for years. The newspaper where I worked nominated me for a state journalism award for an investigative series I had written about educational inequality in rural communities. I won the award, which came with a $5,000 prize and recognition at a ceremony attended by prominent figures in media and government. My parents attended the ceremony, and I watched them beam with pride as I accepted the award and gave a speech about the importance of ensuring that all children receive equal opportunities to succeed, regardless of their circumstances. The irony was not lost on me that I was being recognized for work that highlighted the very kind of systemic inequality I had experienced in my own family. After the ceremony, my mother approached me with tears in her eyes and told me how proud she was of my accomplishments. She said she had always known I would do something important with my life, and that she was grateful to have a daughter who was making such a positive impact on the world. I looked at her, this woman who had shaped my entire identity through conditional love and manufactured obstacles, and I realized that her pride in me was still conditional. She was proud of what I had achieved despite her lack of support, not because of any support she had provided. She was proud of the daughter who had succeeded without her help, while continuing to provide unlimited help to the daughter who struggled even with constant support. That moment of clarity gave me the strength to establish the boundaries I needed to protect my emotional well-being while still maintaining some relationship with my family. I told my parents that I was willing to rebuild our relationship, but only if they were willing to acknowledge the impact of their different treatment and commit to changing their behavior going forward. I explained that I needed them to stop using my independence and success as justification for providing me with less support and consideration than they provided Emma. I needed them to recognize that strength and capability don't disqualify someone from receiving love, encouragement, and assistance when needed. I needed them to understand that treating children differently based on the circumstances of their conception was psychologically damaging and fundamentally unfair. Most importantly, I needed them to stop expecting me to be grateful for the obstacles they had placed in my path while celebrating Emma for overcoming challenges with their help. I needed them to recognize that my achievements were impressive because of the additional barriers I had faced, not in spite of their lack of support. My father was more receptive to these conversations than my mother. He admitted that they had made serious mistakes and expressed genuine remorse for the pain their choices had caused me. He acknowledged that their different treatment had been unfair and committed to being more mindful of their behavior going forward. My mother struggled more with accountability. She continued to insist that their different approach had been appropriate given our different personalities, and she had difficulty accepting that their treatment had caused lasting psychological damage. However, she did agree to participate in family therapy sessions with me, which represented more effort toward addressing our relationship than she had ever made before. Emma remained largely oblivious to the deeper issues at play. She was supportive of my journalism award and seemed genuinely happy for my success, but she couldn't understand why I was making such a big deal about ancient history. She had never questioned why she received more support than I did because she had never needed to question it. The system had worked perfectly for her, so she saw no reason to examine or change it. Over the following year, I maintained limited but cordial contact with my family while continuing my therapy and focusing on my career. I established clear boundaries about the types of conversations and interactions I was willing to have, and I stopped participating in family dynamics that reinforced the old patterns of conditional love and unequal treatment. The breakthrough came during Emma's 25th birthday celebration, when she announced that she had been accepted to graduate school and would be pursuing a master's degree in social work. My parents were thrilled and immediately began discussing how they would support her financially during the program. Later that evening, my mother pulled me aside and told me that she and my father had been thinking about our conversations from the previous year. She said that watching Emma navigate the graduate school application process had given her new perspective on the challenges I had faced when applying for college and seeking their support for student loans. She acknowledged that they had been able to help Emma explore her options and make decisions without the financial stress I had experienced, and she recognized that this support had made Emma's journey significantly easier than mine had been. For the first time, my mother seemed to understand that providing equal love and support didn't mean treating us identically, but rather ensuring that we both received what we needed to succeed. My mother then did something that shocked me completely. She offered to help me pay off my remaining student loans, which still amounted to nearly $15,000 despite my years of aggressive payments. She explained that she and my father had realized they should have provided me with the same educational support they were now providing Emma, and they wanted to correct that inequality even though it was years later. I was tempted to refuse their offer out of pride and principle. I had managed my debt responsibly for years, and I was on track to have it paid off within another 18 months. I didn't need their help, and part of me wanted to prove that I could handle my financial obligations completely independently. But my therapist had been working with me on learning to accept appropriate support and assistance, helping me understand that my reflexive self-reliance was actually a trauma response rather than a healthy personality trait. She encouraged me to consider whether accepting my parents' offer might be a step toward healing our relationship rather than a compromise of my independence. I ultimately decided to accept their financial help, but with conditions. I asked them to make the same offer to Emma for her graduate school expenses, ensuring that we would both receive equivalent educational support from our parents. I also asked them to participate in ongoing family therapy sessions to continue working on our communication and relationship patterns. Most importantly, I asked them to write me a letter acknowledging the mistakes they had made in treating us differently and explaining what they plan to do differently going forward. I needed that acknowledgement in writing, not just because it would help me process and heal from years of conditional love, but because it would serve as a reference point for our relationship as we moved forward. The letter my parents wrote was difficult for them to compose, but incredibly meaningful for me to receive. They acknowledged that they had treated Emma and me unequally based on factors beyond our control, and they recognized that this treatment had caused me psychological harm while preventing Emma from developing important life skills and resilience. They admitted that their different expectations and support systems had been unfair and had been based on their own psychological limitations rather than our actual needs or capabilities. They committed to treating us more equitably going forward and to supporting both of us according to our individual circumstances, rather than according to predetermined assumptions about our personalities or capabilities. Most importantly, they acknowledged that my independence and success were achievements to be celebrated, not reasons to provide me with less love and support than my sister received. They recognized that strength and capability should be rewarded and encouraged, not taken advantage of or taken for granted. Today, 3 years after that Thanksgiving conversation that changed everything, my relationship with my family is healthier than it has ever been. It's not perfect, and we still have moments where old patterns emerge, but we now have a framework for addressing problems directly rather than allowing them to fester and multiply. Emma and I have developed a closer relationship as adults, partly because she has begun to understand the different challenges we faced growing up, and partly because she has started experiencing more independence and responsibility in her own life. She's excelling in her graduate program and has developed a passion for helping children who have experienced family trauma, which has given her new insight into the psychological dynamics that shaped our childhood. My parents have kept their commitment to more equitable treatment, and they've made genuine efforts to support me emotionally rather than just taking pride in my achievements. They ask for my advice and assistance with things, they check in on my well-being regularly, and they've stopped using my success as an excuse to focus their attention and resources on Emma exclusively. Perhaps most importantly, I've learned to value myself based on my own standards, rather than constantly trying to earn love and approval through achievement and perfection. I've learned to ask for help when I need it, to accept support when it's offered, and to recognize that my worth isn't conditional on my independence or capability. The Journalist Award was just the beginning of my professional success. I've since been promoted to senior staff writer, I've won 2 additional awards for my investigative work, and I'm currently writing a book about family dynamics and conditional love that will be published next year. But these achievements feel different now because they're motivated by passion and purpose rather than a desperate need to prove my worth. I've also learned to set healthy boundaries in all my relationships, not just with my family. I've developed a strong network of friends who value and support me unconditionally, and I've started dating someone who appreciates my independence while also encouraging me to be vulnerable and accept care when I need it. The most surprising outcome of this entire experience has been the number of people who have reached out to me after hearing my story. When I started sharing my experience with friends and colleagues, I discovered that family favoritism and conditional love are far more common than I had realized. Many people have told me about their own experiences with parents who treated siblings differently, who provided unequal support and opportunities, or who made love and approval conditional on achievement and behavior. I've started speaking at conferences and workshops about family trauma and recovery, and I've been amazed by the response from audiences who recognize their own experiences in my story. There's something powerful about naming these dynamics and acknowledging their impact, about giving people permission to recognize that unequal treatment isn't normal or acceptable, even when it comes from family members who claim to love us. If you're watching this video because you recognize something familiar in my story, I want you to know that you're not alone and you're not imagining things. Family favoritism is real, conditional love is psychologically damaging, and you deserve to be valued for who you are rather than what you achieve or how little trouble you cause. You don't have to be grateful for obstacles that were placed in your path unnecessarily. You don't have to accept less support and consideration than your siblings receive. You don't have to prove your worth through constant achievement and self-sufficiency. And you don't have to maintain relationships with people who treat you as less valuable than others, even if those people are your family members. Healing from conditional love and family favoritism is possible, but it requires honest acknowledgement of what happened and commitment to change from everyone involved. It requires setting boundaries and being willing to enforce them, even when that's difficult or uncomfortable. And it requires learning to value yourself based on your own standards rather than the impossible standards others may have set for you. If your family is willing to acknowledge their mistakes and work toward more equitable relationships, that's wonderful and worth pursuing. But if they're not willing to change, that doesn't mean you have to accept ongoing mistreatment or diminished treatment. You have the right to surround yourself with people who see your worth and treat you accordingly. The BMW is still sitting in my parents' driveway, though Emma rarely drives it anymore since moving to graduate school in another state. Sometimes when I visit, I look at that car and remember how devastating it felt to see such a clear symbol of unequal treatment and conditional love. But now I also see it as a symbol of how much I've grown and healed. That car no longer represents my parents' failure to value me equally. It represents my strength in demanding better treatment and my success in creating a life where my worth isn't determined by other people's limitations or biases. I've learned that sometimes the greatest gift your family can give you is showing you exactly who they are, because that knowledge allows you to make informed decisions about how much of yourself to invest in those relationships. My parents showed me that their love came with conditions and limitations, and that information allowed me to seek out relationships based on genuine mutual respect and unconditional positive regard. Have you experienced family favoritism or conditional love in your own family? Have you found yourself constantly trying to earn approval and support that seems to come easily to your siblings? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, because sharing these experiences helps all of us feel less alone and more empowered to demand the respect and consideration we deserve. Remember that your worth isn't conditional on your achievements, your independence, or your ability to handle difficult situations without support. You deserve love, encouragement, and assistance simply because you exist, and anyone who treats you otherwise is telling you more about their limitations than about your value. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel, because I'll be sharing more content about family trauma, healing from conditional love, and building healthy relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Together, we can break the cycles of conditional love and create families and communities where everyone is valued equally and supported unconditionally.